She thought she had found everything: a loving husband, a dream marriage, a life that felt safe and beautiful. But there was one person who was about to destroy it all. And that person was the last person in the world she ever expected to betray her, the woman who gave birth to her own mother. Meet Emily, 27 years old, newly married to Daniel, a man who actually listens when she speaks. Meet Daniel, her kind and hard-working husband who treats her with patience and respect. And meet Linda, Emily's mother, a woman about to make a choice that will shake the very foundation of everything Emily believes about love, loyalty, and family. 3 months into her marriage, Emily felt like the luckiest woman alive. When she woke up in the morning, the first thing she saw was sunlight streaming to the bedroom window, and the second thing she felt was gratitude. Not everyone gets to wake up next to someone who makes you feel safe. Not everyone marries someone who listens the way Daniel listened to her. Emily was 27 years old, and she had already lived through enough disappointments to know the difference between genuine love and the pretend kind. She had dated men who smiled at her face but ignored her words. She had known people who promised forever, but meant only until something better came along. So when she met Daniel at a coffee shop on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, something inside her recognized him as different. He was standing in line behind her when she struggled to decide between 2 types of pastries. Instead of looking annoyed like most people would, he said, "You know what? Get both. Life's too short to choose just one dessert." She laughed. He smiled. 3 weeks later, he asked her to dinner. 8 months later, he asked her to marry him. Their wedding was small but perfect. They couldn't afford the grand celebrations that other couples had. There was no expensive venue, no 100-person guest list, no professional photographer. Instead, they held the ceremony in a garden on a Saturday afternoon, surrounded by close family and the people who actually mattered. Emily's mother, Linda, was there, standing in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter exchange vows with a man she had known for less than a year. "I've never seen you so happy," Linda had whispered to Emily right before the ceremony. "I'm so proud of you, baby." Emily hugged her mother tight. This was the beginning of everything. This was the start of her real life. The first 3 months of marriage were exactly what Emily had always imagined. Daniel would come home from work and immediately ask her about her day. Not the polite kind of asking where someone nods while thinking about something else. The real kind of asking where he actually listened to every word she said. If she told him about a problem at work, he would suggest solutions. If she told him about a friend's argument, he would remember the names and follow up on it the next day. "How's your friend Sarah doing with her boyfriend situation?" he would ask casually while they washed dishes together. This kind of attention meant everything to Emily. It meant she mattered. It meant she was seen. Emily had always told her friends that she felt lucky. "I found a good one," she would say, smiling in that way that only newly married women smile. The kind of smile that contains all the hope and joy of believing you made the right choice. Her friends were happy for her. They liked Daniel. He was the kind of husband other people's girlfriends asked about enviously. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. The first strange thing Emily noticed was small. So small that she almost didn't mention it to anyone. Her mother, Linda, started visiting their house more often. Not in the way mothers usually visit their adult children's homes. This was different. Linda began showing up without calling first. She would text Emily a simple message: "I'm in the area. Mind if I stop by?" But when Emily got home, she would often find Linda and Daniel sitting in the kitchen together, talking. At first, Emily didn't think much of it. Her mother had always been close to their family. She had loved Daniel even before Emily married him. When Emily's father passed away 5 years ago, Linda had learned to enjoy the company of good men. Daniel was a good man, so it made sense that she would want to spend time with him. But then Linda started remembering things about Daniel that even Emily didn't always remember. She knew exactly how he liked his coffee. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, stir clockwise. She knew which days he had meetings at work that always left him tired. She knew his favorite foods, his favorite music, the small things that make someone feel understood. Emily noticed Linda defending Daniel more and more in family conversations. If anyone said something even slightly critical about him, Linda would jump in immediately. "You don't understand him like I do," she would say firmly. Emily found this sweet at first. Her mother was protecting her husband. What could be more beautiful than that? One afternoon, Emily came home early. Her shift at work had ended 2 hours sooner than expected, and she decided to surprise Daniel with an early dinner. She opened the front door quietly, planning to peek in the kitchen and see if he was home yet. What she heard stopped her in her tracks. Laughter, her mother's laughter, coming from the kitchen. Emily walked slowly toward the sound. Through the doorway, she could see them. Linda and Daniel were standing by the kitchen counter, their heads bent together over something on Daniel's phone. They were looking at photos. Linda was laughing at something Daniel had said. Daniel was smiling, that kind of smile that comes from genuine enjoyment, not politeness. They didn't hear Emily at first. She watched them for a moment. Her mother looked different, more alive somehow, more animated than Emily had seen her in years. And Daniel looked comfortable, relaxed in a way that made Emily realize this wasn't the first time they had stood together like this. "Mom? Daniel," Emily finally said, her voice coming out higher than she intended. "What's going on?" They both jumped. Linda's laugh cut off immediately. Daniel's smile disappeared. For just a moment, barely long enough to notice. They both looked guilty. Then Daniel's face softened into a normal expression, but Linda's face flushed deep red. "Nothing," Linda said quickly, too quickly. "We were just looking at some photos from the company event Daniel attended. I wanted to see how you looked." Emily smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Something about the moment fell off, but she couldn't quite identify what it was. She decided not to push it. After all, they were family. Her mother and her husband. What could possibly be wrong? Over the next few weeks, Emily found herself thinking about that moment more often than she wanted to. She would lie in bed next to Daniel at night and wonder if she was being paranoid. This was her mother. This was her husband. The two people she trusted most in the world. She had no reason to feel suspicious. But suspicion, once planted, is hard to ignore. Emily began noticing patterns. Linda visited more frequently. She called Daniel to ask his opinion on things that had nothing to do with Emily. "Should I repaint my living room blue or green, Daniel?" Or, "What do you think about my new car, Daniel?" She started remembering his schedule better than Emily did sometimes. She knew when his important meetings were. She knew when he would be stressed. She knew things about his personal problems that Emily was still learning about. Emily tried to convince herself that this was normal. In some cultures, mothers-in-law and sons-in-law had close relationships. In some families, this was expected and beautiful. Why should she feel bothered by it? But every time Linda called Daniel's name, something twisted inside Emily's stomach. Every time Linda defended him passionately or laughed at his jokes a little too hard, Emily felt a small warning bell in her mind. She pushed the feeling down. She told herself she was being unreasonable. She was being jealous of her own mother, which was ridiculous and childish. Emily prided herself on being a mature person, on not creating drama where none existed. So she said nothing. She watched, and she waited. Then came the evening when everything changed forever. Emily had always been someone who trusted her instincts. When she was a child, her mother used to say that Emily could read people like books. She would know immediately if someone was lying to her, even if they were very good at lying. She could sense when something was wrong in a room, even before anyone spoke. This gift, or maybe it was a curse, had saved Emily from many bad decisions over the years, but also meant that ignoring her instincts was torture. For the next 2 weeks, Emily found herself caught between two worlds. On the surface, her life looked perfect. She went to work, came home, spent time with Daniel, and pretended everything was normal. But underneath, she was unraveling. Every notification on her phone made her heart race. Every time Linda's name appeared on Daniel's phone screen, Emily felt a small stab of fear. She started paying attention to things she had previously ignored. The way Linda's voice changed when she talked to Daniel. The way she laughed at his jokes. Not the polite laugh of mother-in-law, but the engaged laugh of someone who finds him genuinely amusing. The way her eyes followed him around the room when she thought no one was watching. One evening, Emily was sitting in the living room pretending to read a book when her mother called Daniel. She wasn't trying to spy. She was just sitting there, and her ears picked up on the conversation that Daniel was having in the kitchen. His voice was low, careful, in a way that made Emily's protective instincts immediately activate. "Linda, we can't keep doing this," Daniel was saying. Emily's heart stopped. Doing what? What were they doing? She quietly placed her book down and moved closer to the kitchen doorway, positioning herself where she could hear but not be seen. Emily knew this was wrong. She knew that listening to private conversations was a violation of trust. But her fear was stronger than her sense of what was right. "I'm not asking you to do anything," she heard her mother's voice. It was soft, sad, and filled with something Emily couldn't quite name. "I just wanted to hear your voice." Emily's hand started shaking. "Linda, you have to understand," Daniel began, but her mother cut him off. "I know," Linda said quietly. "I know this is complicated. I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel anymore." That was when Emily realized she had stopped breathing. She stood frozen in the hallway, her mind spinning, trying to make sense of the words she had just heard. Her mother couldn't help how she felt. How did her mother feel? Emily didn't want to think about the answer, because the answer was terrifying. Daniel was speaking again, his voice firm now. "We need to tell Emily. This is getting out of hand." Emily heard movement in the kitchen. She quickly stepped back into the living room and sat down on the couch, grabbing her book again. Her hands were trembling so badly that she could barely hold the pages steady. A few minutes later, Daniel emerged from the kitchen. He looked tired. He looked worried. He looked like someone who was carrying a heavy secret. He came and sat next to Emily on the couch, and she felt every muscle in her body tense. "How was work?" he asked, his voice sounding perfectly normal. Too normal, like he was trying very hard to sound normal. "Fine," Emily whispered. She didn't trust her voice to say anything more. Daniel looked at her carefully. "Are you okay? You seem upset." Emily wanted to scream. She wanted to ask him what was happening with her mother. She wanted to demand answers to questions she wasn't even sure how to ask yet. But instead, she said, "I'm just tired." Daniel nodded and put his arm around her, and Emily sat there stiffly, feeling like she was living in someone else's body. That night, she couldn't sleep. Daniel fell asleep beside her, and Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running through every conversation she could remember, looking for clues she had missed. Every time Linda had visited, every private moment between her mother and her husband, every look, every word, every gesture took on a new and sinister meaning in her mind. Emily got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Daniel. She went to the guest room and sat on the bed in the darkness. She pulled out her phone and looked at the text messages between Daniel and her mother. They were innocent enough on the surface, casual messages about daily life. But now, knowing what she knew, they seemed to contain hidden meanings. "How was your day?" Her mother had texted. "Boring without you around." Daniel had responded. That was it. Just that. But those 6 words made Emily's chest feel tight. She scrolled through weeks of messages, and the more she read, the more she became convinced that something was genuinely wrong. It wasn't explicitly romantic. There were no "I love you" messages or declarations of feeling. But it was intimate in a way that it shouldn't be between a mother-in-law and a son-in-law. Emily put her phone down and pressed her face into her hands. What was she going to do? How was she going to confront this? Part of her still wanted to believe that she was overreacting, that she was reading too much into innocent interactions. But another part of her, the part that knew how to read people, was screaming that something was very, very wrong. The next morning, Emily woke up to find Daniel already gone. He had left a note on the kitchen counter saying he had gone to the gym early. She looked at the note in his handwriting, and she tried to remember the last time she felt safe. She couldn't. Emily called in sick to work. She needed time to think, to process, to figure out what she was going to do. She spent the day going to the house like a detective looking for evidence. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for. Love notes? Photographs? Some kind of proof that would confirm her worst fears? But she found nothing. Nothing concrete enough to confront them with. Nothing that would hold up if Daniel denied everything. And she was starting to realize that this was exactly what made the situation so painful. She had suspicions. She had overheard a conversation that was deeply concerning, but she didn't have proof of anything actually inappropriate happening. What would she even accuse them of? Emotional intimacy? Liking each other too much? By the time Daniel came home from work, Emily had worked herself up into a state of anxious exhaustion. She was sitting on the couch when he walked in, and the moment he saw her, she could see that he knew something was wrong. "Why are you home?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Are you sick?" Emily wanted to say yes. She wanted to use illness as an excuse for the way she was feeling. But instead, she heard herself ask, "Is there something going on between you and my mother?" The question hung in the air between them like a physical object. Daniel's face went completely pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He sat down slowly on the chair across from Emily. "Emily," he started, "I heard you talking to her yesterday." Emily said quietly, "In the kitchen. You said, we need to tell Emily. This is getting out of hand." "What is getting out of hand, Daniel?" Daniel ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that Emily had seen him make 1,000 times before, but which now seemed to indicate that she was right to be worried. "It's not what you think," he said. But Emily had heard that phrase before. She had heard it in movies, in songs, in stories about relationships falling apart. She had heard from friends who came to her crying because they had discovered infidelity, and every single time, it had preceded an explanation that was exactly what they thought. "Then tell me what it is," Emily said. "Tell me what it is, because I'm sitting here imagining the worst, and I need to know the truth." Daniel stood up and started pacing. This was another bad sign. When people started pacing instead of sitting and facing you, it usually meant they were about to say something difficult. "Your mother has developed feelings for me," Daniel finally said. "Strong feelings. And I didn't know how to handle it at first because I was afraid of hurting her, and I was afraid of hurting you." Emily felt the room spin. So she had been right. Her worst fear was actually true. Her mother had feelings for her husband. Her own husband. "How long?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. "It's been building for a couple of months," Daniel said. "It started with her just being friendly, and then gradually I started to notice that the way she looked at me was different, and I should have told you immediately. But I didn't want to create drama. I thought if I didn't encourage it, it would just go away." "And did it go away?" Emily asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. "No," he finally said. "It got worse. She started finding excuses to see me. She started calling me to talk about things that had nothing to do with you. And then yesterday, she finally told me directly. She said she had developed feelings for me that she couldn't control anymore." Emily felt like she couldn't breathe. Her mother, her own mother, had fallen in love with her husband, the woman who had given birth to her, the woman who had taught her about loyalty and family and right and wrong. That woman had betrayed her. "And what did you say?" Emily whispered. "I told her that it was inappropriate and that we needed to tell you," Daniel said. "I told her that nothing could ever happen between us, that I love you and I'm committed to you, and that her feelings, while I understand them, cannot change that." Emily felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't remember starting to cry. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Why did I have to find out by eavesdropping on your conversation?" Daniel's face crumpled. "I was trying to protect you. I was trying to protect your relationship with your mother. I thought if I could handle it quietly, if I could make her understand that she needed to distance herself, then you would never have to know and your family wouldn't be destroyed." "My family is destroyed," Emily said, her voice rising. "My mother is in love with my husband. That's not something you protect someone from by lying. That's something you tell them immediately so they can decide how to handle it." Daniel moved toward Emily, but she stood up and moved away from him. "Don't," she said. "I can't. I need to think." She grabbed her keys and walked out of the house before Daniel could say anything else. She drove aimlessly, her mind racing, her heart breaking. She drove past her mother's house 3 times before she had the courage to pull into the driveway. Linda answered the door, and the moment she saw Emily's face, she seemed to understand that the secret was out. Her face went white. "Emily, please," Linda started. "We need to talk," Emily said coldly. They sat in the living room of Emily's childhood home, surrounded by photographs of family memories, And Emily asked her mother to explain how she could have done something so devastating. Linda cried. She apologized. She explained that she had been lonely since Emily's father died, that she had been looking for companionship, and that Daniel had simply been kind to her, which had made her develop feelings she couldn't control. "I never wanted to hurt you," Linda said through her tears. "I love you more than anything in the world. Then why would you do this?" Emily asked, her voice hollow. "How could you do this?" Linda didn't have a good answer, because there wasn't one. There was no explanation that could justify what had happened. A mother was supposed to protect her daughter's happiness, not threaten it. A mother was supposed to respect boundaries, not cross them. As Emily sat there in her mother's living room, surrounded by the memories of her childhood, she realized something profound. The person she had trusted most in the world, the person who had raised her and taught her about love and loyalty, had made a choice that proved neither of those things mattered to her as much as her own feelings. Emily stood up to leave. "What happens now?" Linda asked desperately. "Are you going to leave Daniel?" Emily looked at her mother, and for the first time in her adult life, she didn't recognize her. "I don't know," Emily said. "I don't know anything anymore." She drove back to the house where her husband was waiting. She didn't know if she could forgive him for not telling her. She didn't know if she could stay in a marriage where her mother had been able to insert herself so completely. She didn't know if family could ever be the same again. But as she pulled into the driveway and saw Daniel waiting for her on the porch, his face filled with worry and regret, Emily realized that she was about to face the hardest decision of her life, not between her mother and her husband, but between holding on to the past and moving toward an uncertain future. Emily sat on the porch steps next to Daniel that evening, and she didn't speak for a long time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and she watched the colors change as if they held the answers she was searching for. Daniel sat beside her, not pushing, not talking, just being present. She realized that this was actually one of the things she loved about him. He understood that sometimes silence was better than words. "I'm not leaving you," Emily finally said, "but I need you to understand that trust is broken now, not just between you and me, but between me and my mother, and rebuilding that is going to take time." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have told you immediately. I was wrong, and I know that now." Emily looked at him. "We're going to need to talk to someone, a counselor, someone who can help us figure out how to move forward from this." "Anything you need," Daniel said. "I'll do anything." What Emily didn't know at that moment was that forgiveness wouldn't come quickly. It wouldn't come in a dramatic moment where she suddenly felt better. Instead, it would come slowly, day by day, through small choices to trust again, through conversations about feelings and fears, through the hard work of rebuilding something that had been damaged. 3 days later, Emily called her mother. Linda answered the phone like someone who was expecting bad news. "Mom, I need you to listen to me without interrupting," Emily said. "I'm not ready to forgive you. I don't know if I will ever fully forgive you in the way you want me to. But I'm also not going to cut you out of my life completely, because you're my mother, and I love you even though you hurt me." Linda started crying on the other end of the phone. "However," Emily continued, "things are going to change. You need to see a therapist. You need to understand why you made the choices you did. And you need to work on yourself. And you cannot see Daniel alone anymore. If you want to be part of my life, you have to respect that boundary." "I understand," Linda whispered. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I'm so sorry." "I know you are," Emily said, and she meant it. Her mother was sorry. But sorry didn't undo the hurt. Sorry didn't make everything okay. Sorry was just the first step toward healing, not the destination itself. Over the next few months, Emily and Daniel began the process of rebuilding their marriage. They went to couples counseling every week. They talked about things they had never talked about before. Daniel explained how uncomfortable he had felt and why he hadn't known how to handle the situation. Emily explained how betrayed she felt, not just by her mother, but by her husband's silence. "I felt like you chose to protect her feelings over my right to know the truth," Emily told him during one session. "You're right," Daniel said. "I did, and I was wrong. I was afraid of creating conflict, and in trying to avoid conflict, I created something much worse." These conversations were painful. There were nights when Emily cried herself to sleep. There were moments when she wondered if staying in the marriage was the right choice. But there were also moments when Daniel would do something small, remember how she liked her coffee, listen carefully to her day, hold her hand when she was sad, and she would remember why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. Daniel kept his wedding ring on the table for 3 weeks after that terrible night. He told Emily that he would put it back on only when she felt ready. When Emily finally picked it up and slipped it back onto his finger, they both cried. It wasn't a sign that everything was fixed. It was a sign that they were choosing to try. Linda moved to another city 2 months later. She had gotten a job there, and she had begun therapy with a counselor who specialized in relationship issues and emotional attachment problems. Before she left, she and Emily had one final conversation. They sat in a coffee shop, a neutral place where they could talk without the weight of their home surrounding them. Linda looked different. She looked smaller somehow, like she had shrunk under the weight of her own guilt and shame. "I've been thinking a lot about what I did," Linda said, "and I realize now that I was using Daniel to fill a hole inside me. After your father died, I became so lonely, and instead of dealing with that loneliness in healthy ways, I transferred all my emotional needs onto your husband. That wasn't fair to him, and it wasn't fair to you." Emily listened quietly. "I also realized," Linda continued, "that I was jealous of you. I was jealous that you had found love and happiness with someone, and I felt like I had lost my chance at that. So instead of celebrating your happiness, I tried to take a piece of it for myself, and that was one of the most selfish things I've ever done." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. This was the first time her mother had really acknowledged the depth of what she had done, not just apologized, but actually understood. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Linda said. "I'm just asking you to let me become someone better. Let me show you over time through my actions that I'm learning and growing from this mistake." Emily reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. "I do forgive you, Mom. Not because it's easy or because what you did was okay, but because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. I'm forgiving you so that I can move forward with my own life." Linda cried then, the kind of deep, healing cry that comes from truly understanding the consequences of your actions. 1 year later, Emily stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized herself. She looked stronger, not physically, but emotionally. The experience had changed her, but it hadn't broken her. She had learned something that most people don't learn until much later in life, if they learn it at all. She had learned that people you love can hurt you, that trust can be broken, that the world is sometimes unfair and painful and complicated. But she had also learned that you don't have to be destroyed by those things. You can take the pain and transform it into wisdom. You can take betrayal and use it as a lesson about boundaries. You can take heartbreak and use it as a reason to love more intentionally and more carefully. Daniel had kept his promise. He never allowed another person's feelings to come between him and his wife. He was more communicative, more transparent, more present in their marriage. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was built on honesty now, on the foundation of knowing that they had survived something difficult and chosen to stay together anyway. Emily's relationship with her mother slowly began to heal. They didn't go back to the way they were before. That wasn't possible. But they built something new, something healthier. Linda came to visit once a month. She was kind to Daniel, but appropriately so. She respected boundaries. She showed through her actions, not just her words, that she had learned and grown from her mistake. And Emily realized something that changed everything for her. Forgiveness wasn't about pretending nothing happened. Forgiveness was about choosing not to let what happened control the rest of your life. It was about taking your pain, understanding it, and using it to become a wiser, stronger, more compassionate person. "I used to think forgiveness meant everything goes back to normal," Emily told Daniel one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset just like they had on that terrible night a year ago. "But now I understand that forgiveness means accepting that things have changed, accepting that people aren't perfect, and choosing to move forward anyway." Daniel squeezed her hand. "You become so wise," he said. Emily smiled. "I've just learned that life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about moving through pain and becoming better because of it." That night, As Emily lay in bed next to her husband, she thought about all the things she had learned. She thought about the importance of communication, of telling people the truth even when it's difficult. She thought about boundaries and how necessary they are. She thought about forgiveness and how powerful it is. But most of all, she thought about resilience, about the human capacity to survive heartbreak and come out stronger on the other side, about the ability to love people even after they've hurt you, about the choice to heal instead of holding on to anger. And she realized that this was a real love story. Not the beginning when everything was perfect and easy, but the middle and the end, when things got hard and complicated, and you chose to stay anyway, when you chose to work on yourself and your relationships, when you chose forgiveness over bitterness. That was the kind of love that lasted. That was the kind of love that mattered at the end.